Hey, cool cats and kittens. Today we are finishing off our intelligence lesson, and I'm going to make this hopefully short and sweet, shorter than it definitely would be in class. And then remember, after this, you are going to take your end of the week quiz that's going to be due. I'm going to have that be due at the end of Friday. So you'll have all of Thursday and all of Friday. So it'll be due midnight Friday night. Okay, so the last part of intelligence is how do we measure it? Is intelligence measurable with like brain scans and neurological instruments? Okay, so does the size of the brain matter? And yes, there is some correlation between brain size and intelligence. Of course, that's not necessarily mean that it causes it. Just because you have a bigger brain does not cause you to be more intelligent and vice versa. So it could be things that attribute to brain size also attribute to intelligence. So it's very possible that your brain size is dependent on like the amount of nutrition or stimulation that your brain gets. Of course, that's also going to contribute to you also being more intelligent if you have a better diet and access to vegetables and minerals. Than someone else who doesn't, you might be more intelligent, but then also have a larger brain as well. Brain function. Smart brains are fast brains. Okay, this is a lot of junk, but basically they did a test, and people that could say that the right side of the stimulus was short, like longer than the left side of the stimulus. The smarter brains said it faster. So here's one more thing about a smart brain. Our brain's fuel is glucose, blood sugar. And so when you think, you're using glucose to process information. It's your fuel. Here's the thing about intelligent brains, though. They require less glucose to function. It's almost like smart brains are fuel efficient. They're like little Priuses versus a gas guzzling like SUV or a big truck takes a lot of fuel to do the same work. A fuel efficient car takes less fuel. And so your brain is kind of the same thing. Your brain is a smart brain is like a Prius, while a dumb brain is kind of like the jacked up truck, which kind of makes sense. um, anyway, so yes, our brain is faster, a smart brain is faster, and a more intelligent brain is also more fuel efficient in terms of glucose. And we could measure that by a PET scan that measures glucose and see which parts of the brain are really, really using that fuel and not using that fuel. Let's talk about the dynamics of intelligence really quick, the two ends of the spectrum. Of course, the lower and intelligence is pretty stable throughout your life. But let's talk about the extremes of mental retardation and something called gifted. So, mentally handicapped people score like what determines that they're mentally handicapped is if their IQ is less than 70. And so there's different levels of being mentally challenged and handicapped in that way. I mean, you can, for the most part, someone that has an IQ of 70 probably going to go through high school. They'll probably graduate high school. They can hold down a job, like hold down like a living situation, things like that. But there are extremely low versions of mentally handicapped people that have the brain capacity of infants, and they're never going to be able to feed themselves or clothe themselves or be potty trained, and they're going to require assistance in their living for their whole life. Of course, on the opposite end of that is gifted, highly intelligent, labeling of genius or higher genius, which is actually a term. Like there's genius, higher genius, and highest genius. So it's like, can't we get a thesaurus out and like come up with different vocabulary for these types of people? But whatever. So anything above a 135 IQ is going to be considered genius. So lower than 70, mentally handicapped. Higher than 135 is going to be gifted. And we would talk about this in class, but honestly, it's not that super important. So when it comes to the environment and how that affects your intelligence, early neglect or a non-stimulating environment is going to lead to lower levels, is correlated at least, is going to be correlated with lower levels of intelligence. There are the example of Jeannie. We talked about Jeannie in class, the girl who had been kept in the basement her whole life and had, never learned how to speak really, never learned how to walk or feed herself. She would have been average. Chances are she would have been average if she had been, raised by the family next door or something. But because of the way that she was raised and because of her environment and the extreme neglect and abuse that she suffered, she was technically at the end of her life. I think she's still alive. I haven't checked up on her lately, but she was considered mentally handicapped and could not develop those skills that were absent early in her life. Schools have a lot effect on environment. When you have access to education, and education all the way from pre-K to 12th grade and even higher levels of education, and all year long, typically have a higher IQ than people who drop out or people that have access to education. Maybe they are migrant workers that have to be pulled out of school for agricultural reasons or things like that. They're going to have they're not going to have access to education. So they're not going to be fueling their brain with information and processing skills and things like that. There's also genetic influences on intelligence. The apple doesn't fall that far from the tree. And so here are IQ scores, or how similar IQ scores are. So if you're an identical twin that was reared together, meaning they grew up in the same household, their IQ scores are basically going to be identical. So, this is how 90% similar scores. If they are identical twins that were reared apart, like they grew up separately from each other, but still identical twins, their IQs are still even that much more similar than just regular siblings. Meaning their genetics, which are the same here, is going to have a higher influence on their IQ than their environment. And just a regular person, unrelated individuals that were not they're not blood related, if they have similar scores, but not as similar as obviously identical twins. And it said that studies of twins that took intelligence tests, their IQs were so similar and their tests were so similar, it looked like the same person took the test twice. When questions were gotten wrong by the twins, they typically put the same wrong answer. That's just eerie. Okay, this is where we talk about intelligence tests being different between men and women. This is from a textbook written by a man. So even though this sounds a little sexist, this is from the, what's the name of David Meyer's AP Psychology textbook. I forget what edition. I think it's the 10th edition or something. He's moved on to the 17th edition now. But this is from David Myers. So, girls are better spellers. Girls are more verbally fluent and can remember more words. Girls are better at locating objects. If you want to argue with that, ask your mom where something is. She'll know. Girls are more sensitive to touch, taste, and color. Here's one for boys. Boys outnumber girls in counts of underachievement. I love reading this list in class. Okay, here's one, really. Boys outperform girls at math problem solving. Women detect more emotions than men do. They have a higher EQ, usually. Racial groups also differ on average scores of intelligence tests. So when I say the average IQ is 100, that is typically for white people in America. It might be different and it might be white men in America. So it might be different. The question is, why are different races have different IQ averages? Typically, the race that has the highest IQ on average, of course, there are outliers on every race group, is going to be Asians. Asians have a higher IQ score, typically. and with like Caucasians being right there at 100, and typically lower performing is going to be African American. And people think like, well, this just proves people are like that people should be racist because people are, no. These tests are bias, and the environment that people live in, um, have a lot to do with their intelligence. We just talked about that. So, people that have that suffer from the systemic racial problems, especially in this country, they might not have access to the resources and the education that the typical middle like class white people might have, and so they're going to, and then like in Asian countries, people like in China, people in Japan, and South Korea, they have year-long school. So they are not, we do get a little dumber in the summer. And you might be feeling that a little bit now with this online learning. You just feel like you're not on your game, and it's true. Americans typically their IQ falls about 5 points in the summer, but let's say that, and then you spend like the first 2 or 3 months of school trying to lose what you lost over summer break, and trying to like review and things. Well, in Asian countries that you have year-round school, they never have that summer dumber feeling, and they never have the review from previous years of that you lost because they have year-round school. So could that be why their IQ scores are higher, and maybe because of systemic racism in our society, could that be why we have lower IQ scores for African Americans? I don't know. Some people say that the point of the IQ test is to prove that racist ideas are correct. That they like this is evidence that like white people are better, but no, 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 no. So tests do discriminate. Some argue that their sole purpose is to discriminate. You're going to have words on tests that might not be all that used in I don't know, let me say like in lower income brackets, or maybe in different race groups. Just the dialect is different, the words that are used are different. And so if a test is written in a way that is supposed to, it maybe it's written in a way using vocabulary that typically upper middle class white people use. It is not written in a way, in a dialect, that is going to be better for maybe English language learners or people that are not familiar with that vocabulary, and they're going to be at a disadvantage already. So you have to be just aware that tests to discriminate on gender, on race, and on income levels, with the wording that they use, with the fact that typically it's timed. Your IQ goes down the longer you take it. And if you're doing some sort of translating in your head because it's not in the wordage that you typically speak, that's going to give you a lower IQ score right there. So even though you might not be dumber. Anyway, so that's just, we have to look for this type of discrimination when we are taking tests, especially IQ tests. All right, we are done talking about intelligence. Yay. Hopefully that wasn't too long. I wanted to go shorter, but sometimes I get tripped up over words when I'm talking about the things that we talked about today. So have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Don't forget to take your end of the week quiz between now and end of Friday, and have a good weekend. Bye, guys.